Daniel chapter 3 Introduction. Unwavering faith, loyalty, and divine rescue. Let's go about 2600 years back to the dusty plains of Dura, where the 90-foot golden statue gleamed under the Babylonian sun. King Nebuchadnezzar issued a brutal ultimatum that shook everyone to the core: worship the statue or face the fire. The command was absolute. The music was loud and there was no middle ground. It was either total submission or a death sentence in a blazing furnace. In this moment of overwhelming pressure, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced an impossible choice. Their decision wasn't just about refusing to bow, it was about the faith so strong that the flames lost their power to burn. True bravery is in the absence of the furnace, but the revelation of the fourth man who meets you there. Nebuchadnezzar's golden ego and the universal command, verses 1 to 7. In Daniel chapter 2, God showed Nebuchadnezzar a glimpse of the future. He showed the king a multi-metal statue where only the head was gold, representing Babylon as just one passing chapter in a much larger story. But Nebuchadnezzar didn't want to be a chapter. He wanted to be the whole book. Instead of accepting God's timeline, his ego exploded. He decided to reject prophecy and write his own version of history. The Golden Ambition, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. This wasn't just a statue, it was a visual rebellion. By making it all gold, he was shouting to the world, "My kingdom will never end. My power is absolute." In that moment, the plain of Dura ceased to be a piece of land. It became a stage for a cosmic confrontation between a man's ego and God's sovereignty. The strategy of the summons, verses 2 and 3. Verse 2. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. The king just didn't build the idol. He set a trap for every heart in the empire. He summoned the entire leadership to assemble on one stage. The satraps, the highest regional rulers, the prefects and governors, the military commanders and civil administrators, and the advisors, treasurers, judges, and magistrates, the core functional elite, thus forcing the entire administrative and military spine of the empire as captive audience to stand before his creation. He wanted to make sure that when he gave the command to worship, the most powerful people were already standing in his shadow, leaving them with nowhere to hide and no excuse to disobey. The sound of sovereignty, a decree that demanded the world. Verse 4. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language." The herald, the official state announcer and direct mouthpiece of the king's absolute authority, ensured that the decree was public, loud, clear, and unavoidable. The decree began with a breathtaking claim: "O peoples, nations, and men of every language." Nebuchadnezzar isn't just talking to Babylon. By summoning every ethnic and linguistic group, Nebuchadnezzar positioned himself as a global emperor, claiming authority over the entire world. He attempts to rewrite the divine script from Daniel 2, where God revealed a divine storyline of successive kingdoms, Babylon being only the first chapter. But here, Nebuchadnezzar attempts to slam that book shut. In effect, he declares, "There will be no next chapter. History ends with me. My kingdom is the final kingdom and my glory is eternal." He universalizes idolatry. He takes a political command and turns it into a mandatory world religion, demanding that worship of his image became the single faith for all humanity. The engineered anthem, music as a weapon of compliance, verses 5 and 6. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. King Nebuchadnezzar didn't just use music for atmosphere, he engineered it as a weapon of mass psychological warfare. His acoustic arrangement of instruments was the ultimate sound system of the ancient world, designed with a specific deadly purpose. He combined the loud piercing blast of wind instruments like the horn, flutes and pipes to ensure the signal reached every corner of the plane with the melodious, emotional, hypnotic pull of stringed instruments like the harp, lyre and zither. This wasn't an orchestra for enjoyment, it was a psychological trap. Science shows us that music bypasses the logical mind and targets the emotional center, making group synchronization feel automatic. The equation was brutally simple. Everyone hears, everyone moves, everyone bows. It was engineered sound designed to overwhelm the senses, capture the heart, and make bowing feel as natural as breathing to the beat. With the first note came the irreversible ultimatum: bow and live or stand and burn. In that moment, the plain of Dura became a battleground for the soul. Every person faced the ultimate choice: 1. Compliance, to move with the rhythm of the crowd, or 2. Courage, to stand still in the steadfast silence of faith. The furnace blazed, the orchestra swelled, and history held its breath to see which song the heart would obey, the song of compliance or the song of courage. The power of immediate obedience. Verse 7. The moment the music rose, the response was instant. Without a second thought or a moment of delay, the entire crowd fell to bow. This reveals the frightening power of collective pressure. When thousands bow in unison, resistance feels utterly lonely. True faith is revealed not by the sound you follow, but by the stand you refuse to take. When the music stops and the world is watching, it isn't the melody that matters, it's your choice. When the dust settled, thousands lay prostrate before the statue. But 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, remained standing. Their obedience to God made them instant rebels in the eyes of the state. The strategy of vengeance. Verses 8 to 11. Some Chaldean astrologers, driven by jealousy and resentment, targeted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They flattered the king and repeated his decree to sharpen their trap. This shows that faithful obedience often provokes opposition. But even in silence, faith speaks louder than any sound engineered to force compliance. The precise accusation. Verse 12. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Notice the strategy. This wasn't just a report of disobedience. It was a charge of personal treason. They framed a stand as a direct insult to the king's ego. The furnace of accusation is simply the prelude to a greater revelation of God's presence. Where was Daniel? Following his promotion in chapter 2, Daniel had become a central pillar of the imperial government, that is, the king's chief advisor. The summons to the plain were specifically for provincial officers like the satraps, prefects, and governors. Daniel's rank at the royal court placed him above these provincial requirements. More than that, Daniel was politically untouchable. He had already saved the empire's wise men and interpreted the king's deepest mysteries. He was far too valuable to be targeted in a public spectacle. So, the enemies of the Jews chose to strike at the administrative level instead, targeting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego while leaving Daniel at the throne. Notice the strategic hand of God. Daniel was positioned at the highest level to influence policy, while his friends were positioned to display the power of faith on a public stage. In God's plan, your position is never an accident. Whether you are in the palace or the furnace, you are exactly where He needs you to be. The anatomy of the unshakable stand. The power of a refusal. Verses 13 to 18. Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego did not bow, accusation turned into revelation. Their steadfast loyalty transformed a royal trial into a testimony of faith, proving that obedience to God outweighs the threats of kings. Intensity is not authority. Verse 13. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. The king's rage was not a sign of his power, but a sign that his control was being threatened. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remained calm because they realized that the king's temporary temper was nothing compared to their God's eternal temperament. The question of identity. Is it true? Verse 14. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? The king's direct question forced their private convictions into the light. This was a furnace before the furnace. That is the moment when you stop talking about your faith and start standing in it, proving to everyone watching who you truly serve. Your answer either confirms your loyalty or nullifies it. The ultimatum of the ego. Verse 15. Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Nebuchadnezzar demanded worship of his image, offering what seemed like an escape hatch, a second chance to simply go along with the crowd and worship the image. His ultimatum was steeped in pride, mocking the very power of God. He fell into a prideful deception that his earthly authority was so absolute that not even the Lord himself could rescue them from his hand. The answer of peace. Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. Their reply shows unshakable confidence. They didn't feel the need to argue or justify themselves before the king. Their calm assurance reveals that true faith doesn't depend on human approval. It rests securely in God's authority. You owe no explanation to the world's noise when your loyalty is already anchored in the divine. Unshakable confidence in God's deliverance. Verse 17. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. Before they faced the heat, the three friends held absolute certainty in God's power that he is able. This verse powerfully reminds us that our perspective on any problem shifts the moment we acknowledge that God's ability is greater than any circumstance the world can create. The even if conviction, faith without conditions. Verse 18. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. This is the highest expression of mature faith. They were sure of God's power, and so they were unconcerned with his method of deliverance. Their obedience was not anchored on the outcome, but on God's unchanging character. They moved beyond transactional faith, where you only follow God if he guarantees your safety, to covenantal loyalty, where you trust his character more than your personal security. This is a hallmark of spiritual maturity. It's a steadfast heart that refuses to try and manipulate God for a miracle. Stayed standing because they had already decided the God they served was worth the walk into the flames. When opposition intensifies, faith stands strong. Verses 19 to 23. When fury turns to fire. Verse 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and he commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. Nebuchadnezzar tried to diminish God by magnifying the furnace, as if increasing the furnace could reduce divine power. To the world, their doom was sealed. To the king, this was the end of the rebellion, the helplessness of the bound. Verse 21. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. It magnifies their total helplessness. They were bound and thrown in, wearing the very clothes they had on, which were flammable garments. This This stark detail makes their later complete preservation an undeniable and total miracle. The fire that consumes the mighty, verses 22-23. The king's furious command backfired spectacularly. The superheated furnace he ordered consumed his own soldiers, not his victims. Bound and condemned, the three faithful men fell helplessly into the roaring flames. God's presence and the proof of an undeniable testimony, verses 24-27. Counting 3, witnessing 4, verse 24. Suddenly the king's fury turned to amazement. Glancing into the roaring furnace, he saw the impossible. There were not 3 men being consumed, but 4 men walking around unbound and unharmed. The 4th man in the fire, verse 25. The king himself identified the 4th figure, declaring he looked like a son of the gods. This was a pre-incarnate appearance of the Son of God, choosing to stand in solidarity with his faithful servants in the darkest hour. God did not remove the fire, he revealed his glory within it. His presence transformed the furnace from a place of destruction into a sanctuary of deliverance. From furnace to freedom, verse 26. The king who once mocked God now honors him, calling his servants out of the fire. What was meant for destruction became a testimony of God's supreme deliverance. No scent of the struggle, verse 27. The satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors gathered in awe to witness God's undeniable protection over his faithful servants. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair of their heads singed, their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. The gathered leaders witnessed the impossible. This was a complete and undeniable demonstration of God's perfect protection. The only thing the flames consumed was the robes that had bound them, because God allowed the fire to burn away bondage, not his children. When God delivers, he does so fully, leaving no scars, no residue, and no evidence of defeat. The Most High God exalted. Praise, proclamation, and promotion. Verses 28-30. Praise. The king acknowledges the King of Kings. Verse 28. The miracle in the fire produced a miracle in the king's heart. Nebuchadnezzar was compelled to praise the God of Israel. Because 3 men chose death over disloyalty, their private no to bow to the idol became a public yes to God's glory. Proclamation. Faith declared publicly. Verse 29. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged the unmatched saving power of God, declaring that no other God could save in such a way. However, in the second part of his decree, he revealed the brutality of human pride, threatening punishment and turning houses into rubble for anyone who spoke against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The miracle displayed God's mercy, but the king's response showed man's tendency to force faith through fear. Promotion, faithfulness rewarded. Verse 30. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. What was meant to destroy them became the very means of their elevation. When we stand firm with God in the fire, we don't just survive, we step into greater influence and purpose. Conclusion. A charge to the unbowed. You are not created to bend to the rhythm of the crowd. You are created to lead an unbowed life. To walk in that power, you must anchor your soul on these 3 truths. 1. Intensity is not authority. The world shouts loudest when it's losing control. If the furnace blazes, it only proves your stand has already won. Move from the if-then contract to an even-if conviction. Stop negotiating with God. Start trusting in Him. Stand because He is God, not because He promised you an easy way out. The fire is your freedom. The same fire that destroys the enemy becomes a furnace of freedom, burning away the ropes that once held you bound. The world is waiting for the move of someone who refuses to bow. Don't wait for the fire to die down to feel safe. You are safe the moment you step into the flames, because the 4th man is already there. Don't just survive the heat. Walk through it, break your chains, and let the world see the God who saves.